Can the United States afford a war with China? The US's propensity for spending more than it has landed it in a US $33 trillion debt. Furthermore, the US's position towards Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and China have weakened United States dollar hegemony. U.S. foreign policy in Taiwan holds also a direct implication on the internal economic showdown. United States President Joe Biden submitted his U.S. $6.9 trillion budget proposal for the fiscal year 2024 to Congress. The proposal includes running a U.S. $1.8 trillion deficit, which is essentially 35.3% of an estimated $5.1 trillion government revenue. The U.S. government has long had the propensity for spending more than it has, which is why it has amassed more than U.S. $33 trillion in debt. But the problem lies in the fact that the country's deficit has doubled from a little over $1 trillion just a few years ago to nearly $2 trillion now. If this trend continues, Republicans estimate that the gross federal debt or the national debt will increase by more than $10 trillion in the next decade and swell to $50 trillion. As the federal debt increases, it will be increasingly difficult for the U.S. government to borrow. At present, large foreign holders of U.S. debt such as China and Japan are paring back holdings of U.S. treasuries to stabilize their economy, worsening the U.S. government's financial crisis as a result. Throughout history, empires ultimately meet their downfall because of financial crises. France found itself trapped in severe financial difficulties because of the 7 Years' War. While the finance minister repeatedly advised King Louis XVI to proceed with caution and not get involved in the war between the UK and its colony, the US, the French elites could not resist the temptation of using America to weaken Britain and gave huge financial support to the American Revolutionary War. This plunged France into a bigger financial crisis and triggered the French Revolution, which sent King Louis XVI to the guillotine. The US is now heavily in debt and should work on easing its financial pressures. But the Biden administration in its proxy war in Ukraine against Russia and is deeply embroiled in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which further worsened the US's financial situation. American elites are keen about achieving geopolitical advantage on the global arena, but also weakening themselves in the process. What the American economy needs at the moment is not to weaken its adversaries but to better strengthen its financial security. Today, numerous problems in the U.S., including deteriorating public facilities, homelessness, and issues with food security are left unresolved because of the limited financial resources. Moving away from the U.S. dollar. The US dollar as a global trade and foreign exchange reserve currency is an important pillar of US global influence. Americans are able to rely heavily on borrowing and money printing to keep the US fiscal deficit operating as a result of this important pillar. Moving away from the US dollars, Russia can only take an alternative approach and bypass the dollar with other BRICS countries such as China to trade in their local currencies. The US has taken actions towards Russia over the Russia-Ukraine war, joining hands with its allies in imposing unprecedented sanctions on Russia, expelling Russia from the SWIFT banking system, freezing Russia's foreign assets, and cutting off Russia from US dollar transactions. While these actions have delivered a serious blow to Russia, Western sanctions on Russia have backfired, and forced countries such as China, Iran, India, and Brazil to prepare for potential sanctions that may be imposed against them in the future. To overcome the sanctions, Russia took an alternative approach and bypassed the dollar with other BRICS countries such as China to trade in their local currencies. As a result, more than 50% of Russia's foreign trade is now settled in RMB and the ruble, as the country moves to reduce its US dollar reserves. U.S. sanctions on Iran also forced Iran to move closer ties with China, leading to the signing of a 25-year cooperation agreement between Iran and China that provides China with heavily discounted Iranian oil paid for in RMB. China gaining upper hand. Saudi Arabia is an important U.S. ally in the Middle East, since U.S. dollar influence was maintained by Saudi Arabia's petrodollar policy. But after the Russia-Ukraine war broke out, the U.S. asked Saudi Arabia to increase oil production to support the U.S.'s effort in stabilizing the oil markets. Saudi Arabia was hesitant in doing so, and that dwindled their relationship. On that matter, Saudi Arabia accelerated the country's engagement with China. Chinese President Xi Jinping was invited to visit Saudi Arabia, and the two countries signed dozens of agreements during the visit. Saudi Arabia also lessened its use of its petrodollar policy and allowed China to pay for Saudi's oil exports in RMB. Under China's mediation, representatives from Saudi Arabia and Iran have met in Beijing and agreed to resume diplomatic relations that were cut since 2016. The U.S. has always had a strong presence in the Middle East, but China is now trying to clinch more influence in the region. Although the U.S. appears to be calm about it, it is definitely concerned. In this international climate, although the U.S. government and military have suggested the possibility of going to war with China over Taiwan, the country's financial crisis might limit its ability to conduct large-scale combat operations overseas. Thank you for watching.